When we talk about enhancing cognitive capacity, memory, attention span, motivation, creativity, it's easy to look at supplements or strategies that give an immediate jolt. Nootropics, smart drugs, stimulants. But that's not where sustainable brain strength is built. It's built in the consistency of what you consume, and specifically, it's built in the way your diet interacts with the chemistry of your nervous system. One of the most powerful, yet underleveraged categories of brain-enhancing foods are those that modulate dopamine production in a stable, supportive way. Let's dig into that. Dopamine is often misunderstood. It's not just the molecule of pleasure, it's the molecule of motivation, drive, goal, directed behavior, and reinforcement. In other words, dopamine is the neurochemical engine behind your desire to act, to learn, to build, to grow. And while there are plenty of synthetic ways to spike dopamine, think caffeine, sugar, social media, the problem with these is that they're unsustainable and often leave you depleted. You want to build a dopamine system that's robust, balanced, and capable of producing steady motivation over time. And here's the incredible part, your diet can either support or sabotage that effort. Foods rich in the amino acid tyrosine are the raw materials your brain uses to synthesize dopamine. Tyrosine is a precursor. It's converted into L-dopa and eventually into dopamine itself through a series of enzymatic reactions. This means if you are under-consuming protein-rich foods, especially those high in tyrosine, you are literally limiting your brain's capacity to feel motivated. What foods are high in tyrosine? Turkey, chicken, eggs, fish, cottage cheese, pumpkin seeds, almonds. These are what I call foundational motivation foods, not because they're trendy, but because they provide the substrates, literally the molecular building blocks, that your brain needs to produce drive. And I want to go deeper here because the synthesis of dopamine doesn't stop with tyrosine. It also requires cofactors like vitamin B6, folate, and iron. Without these, the enzymatic machinery that converts tyrosine to dopamine can't operate efficiently. So a tyrosine-rich diet without the supporting cast of micronutrients still leads to suboptimal outcomes. That's why it's not just about eating one superfood. It's about eating a matrix of foods that synergize to support your dopamine system. Take eggs, for example. They're a near-perfect package. They contain tyrosine, B vitamins, choline for acetylcholine synthesis, another key neurotransmitter, and healthy fats to support cell membrane fluidity. A single egg is a nutritional orchestra playing for your brain. And yet, many people avoid eggs out of outdated fears around cholesterol. But the data has shifted. For most people, dietary cholesterol from whole foods like eggs does not significantly impact serum cholesterol. More importantly, your brain needs cholesterol to build neuronal membranes and to produce steroid hormones. When you start your day with high-quality proteins and healthy fats, you are setting up your dopamine system for balance. Compare that to starting your day with a high-carb, low-protein breakfast like sugary cereal or a bagel. You get a blood sugar spike, a flood of insulin, and then a crash. That crash doesn't just affect your physical energy, it affects your neurotransmitter dynamics. Your brain isn't getting the precursors it needs. You feel foggy, distracted, irritable, and often you reach for more sugar or caffeine just to feel normal again. That's a loop, it's a trap, and it's one we can escape by rewiring our dietary inputs. Let's shift gears and talk about another group of brain foods, those that enhance neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain to rewire itself in response to experience. It's what allows you to learn, to recover from injury, to build new habits, and to evolve your identity. But neuroplasticity is not always on. It's a gated process. There are windows when your brain is more plastic, like during childhood, during deep focus, after certain forms of exercise, or during sleep. But there's another way to support plasticity through brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. BDNF is a protein that acts like a fertilizer for your brain. It promotes the growth of new neurons, the formation of new synapses, and the survival of existing neural circuits. It's crucial for memory formation, emotional regulation, and long-term cognitive resilience. And again, certain foods can enhance BDNF expression. We're talking about real molecular signaling here, not just feeling better, but literally changing the structure and function of your brain. So what foods increase BDNF? First, let's talk about flavonoids. These are plant compounds found in berries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, as well as in dark chocolate and green tea. Flavonoids cross the blood-brain barrier and stimulate BDNF expression. Blueberries in particular have been shown to improve memory and executive function in both animal and human studies. They're not just antioxidants, they are signaling molecules that talk to your neurons and say, grow, adapt, survive. Another BDNF-boosting compound is curcumin, the active ingredient in turmeric. Curcumin has a broad range of neuroprotective effects, including anti-inflammatory action, antioxidant support, and the ability to increase BDNF levels. However, curcumin is poorly absorbed on its own. You need to consume it with black pepper, which contains piperine, to enhance its bioavailability. I often recommend people integrate turmeric into meals like curries or take it in a supplement form that includes piperine. And let's not forget omega-3 fatty acids again, EPA and DHA. Not only do they support membrane fluidity and neurotransmitter signaling, but they also upregulate BDNF. This is why diets that are rich in fatty fish, nuts, seeds, and leafy greens tend to support long-term cognitive health. They are feeding your brain the very molecules it needs to grow. There's another fascinating angle to this, intermittent fasting. Now, I'm not suggesting everyone should fast, but the data shows that intermittent fasting, done properly, can also increase BDNF levels and enhance synaptic plasticity. The mechanism, mild stress on the brain from fasting, induces adaptive changes, including the release of ketones, which serve as an alternative fuel for neurons and stimulate BDNF production. But here's the key, you need to feed the brain after that fast with high-quality nutrients. Fasting without nutrient-dense refeeding doesn't work. So I often suggest breaking a fast with a meal rich in protein, healthy fats, and brain-boosting compounds. For example, a piece of salmon, some avocado, a side of greens with olive oil, and perhaps a few berries. That's a BDNF feast. That's a neuroplasticity protocol disguised as a meal. Let's explore another BDNF-supporting nutrient, magnesium. This mineral is involved in synaptic signaling and has been shown to increase plasticity, especially in the hippocampus, the brain region associated with memory. Magnesium-rich foods include spinach, almonds, cashews, black beans, and dark chocolate. Again, real food. Consistent consumption, cumulative benefit. I want to circle back to a point I made earlier. You don't get immediate fireworks when you eat these foods. This isn't a caffeine rush. It's not a short-term hack. It's a structural strategy. You're building scaffolding for long-term brain development. Over days, weeks, and months, these choices change the architecture of your brain. They change your capacity to learn, to regulate emotions, to focus for hours without feeling depleted. And this doesn't just affect your work life. It affects your relationships, your ability to be present, your capacity to handle stress, your emotional bandwidth, your resilience in the face of setbacks. All of these are brain-dependent traits, and all of them can be supported by your diet if you approach it with intention, knowledge, and consistency. Now, there's a final layer to this I want to touch on, and it has to do with inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the most insidious enemies of brain health. It's subtle, it's systemic, and it often goes undetected. But over time, it degrades synaptic function, reduces BDNF, and increases the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. What causes brain inflammation? Highly processed foods, excess sugar, industrial seed oils, lack of fiber, and poor gut health. What reduces it? A Mediterranean-style diet rich in olive oil, nuts, fish, vegetables, and fermented foods. These foods are anti-inflammatory at a systemic level. They reduce oxidative stress, improve endothelial function, and modulate immune signaling. And here's the kicker: anti-inflammatory diets aren't just good for preventing disease, they are performance-enhancing. When inflammation is reduced, neuronal firing is more precise, signal-to-noise ratio improves, emotional reactivity goes down. Sleep quality improves, and the entire brain-body system becomes more coherent. So what does this mean in practical terms? It means that what you eat today right now can either support or impair your ability to think, to focus, to create, to connect. Every bite sends a signal, every meal is a message to your brain. Are you sending the signal to grow, to adapt, to optimize? Or are you sending the signal to slow down, to inflame, to degenerate? The beauty of nutritional neuroscience is that you don't need to wait years to feel the impact. Within days or weeks of consistent eating, you begin to experience clarity. You begin to feel different. Not just because you're avoiding the bad stuff, but because you're feeding the system the raw materials it needs to thrive. This is where strength of mind begins, not in heroic effort, not in dopamine manipulation through screens or stimulants, but in the deep cellular nourishment of your brain. It's quiet, it's daily, it's powerful, and it's available to you right now. When we think about cognitive performance, about mental resilience, emotional regulation, and the capacity to sustain focus over long periods of time, we often think about training the brain through meditation, learning, or various neuroplasticity protocols, and that's important. Those tools are absolutely essential. But there's an underlying reality that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and it's this: your brain is a biological organ. It is made up of living cells. It consumes energy. It requires nutrients, and it operates in a chemical and electrical ecosystem that's highly sensitive to what you consume. In fact, one of the most overlooked dimensions of mental health and cognitive enhancement is nutrition. What you eat literally becomes the substrate your brain uses to function. Neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, these aren't magic chemicals floating around in space. They are synthesized from precursors, from amino acids, from fatty acids, from vitamins, from minerals. If you are low in these precursors, or if your system is overwhelmed by inflammatory foods or underpowered by poor metabolic health, it becomes biologically impossible to perform at your best. Cognitively, now, I'm not talking about extreme diets or a one-size-fits-all regimen. This isn't about trends. This is about precision nutrition for the brain. This is about identifying the compounds that matter, the foods that provide them in bioavailable form, and building habits that support sustained neurocognitive performance. Let's start with a basic but critical observation. Many people walk around in a state of chronic brain energy deficit. Their brains are starving, not from a lack of calories, but from a lack of usable brain-supporting nutrients. And the paradox is, they may be overeating but still undernourished. They're taking in large amounts of calories, particularly from ultra-processed foods that are low in essential micronutrients and high in inflammatory compounds. And yet their brains are operating in a kind of fog, a cognitive quicksand. This manifests in various ways: difficulty focusing, poor memory retention, emotional reactivity, and low mood. You might even chalk it up to personality or discipline, but at a cellular level, your brain cells are simply underpowered. And no amount of mental toughness or productivity hacks can compensate for that. Your neurons cannot fire optimally if they are malnourished. Your prefrontal cortex, which governs executive function, decision-making, and inhibition, essentially your ability to live a focused and intentional life, relies heavily on a stable supply of energy and micronutrients. The question becomes, what can we do about it? How do we feed the brain properly? First, we need to shift our framework. Rather than thinking about food as just fuel or pleasure, we must begin to think of it as information. Food is information for your brain. Every bite you take sends molecular signals that either support or hinder brain function. This is where the science of nutritional neuroscience comes in, and it tells us some very clear things. One of the foundational nutrients your brain absolutely requires is omega-3 fatty acids, particularly EPA and DHA. These are long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids that form the very structure of neuronal membranes. In other words, the physical integrity of your brain cells, how flexible, responsive, and efficient they are, depends on whether you are getting enough of these fats. DHA, in particular, is critical for synaptic plasticity, the process by which your brain forms and reorganizes connections in response to learning and experience. If you are low in DHA, your brain is less able to adapt, less able to remember, less able to focus. EPA plays a vital role in reducing neuroinflammation and supporting mood regulation. This is not theoretical. There is a substantial body of research showing that people with higher intakes of omega-3s, especially from marine sources like fatty fish, salmon, sardines, anchovies, tend to perform better on cognitive tests, have lower rates of depression and anxiety, and show healthier patterns of brain aging. And here's something I want to emphasize. Your brain cannot synthesize adequate amounts of EPA and DHA on its own. You have to get them from your diet or from high-quality supplementation. Most people, especially those following Western dietary patterns, are severely deficient in these critical fats. Their brains are operating with inferior building materials. It's like trying to build a skyscraper with wet cardboard instead of steel. You need to ask yourself, what are you constructing your mind out of? In addition to omega-3s, another absolutely foundational category of nutrients is the class of micronutrients that support mitochondrial function. The mitochondria are the energy factories of your cells, including brain cells. If your mitochondria are impaired, everything slows down. You experience brain fog, fatigue, low motivation, and impaired memory. Micronutrients like magnesium, B vitamins, especially B6, B9, and B12, zinc, and iron all support mitochondrial health. These nutrients are not always easy to get in sufficient quantities from processed food. For example, magnesium is depleted in over 50% of the population, and yet it's involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body, many of which directly affect brain function, including synthesis of GABA, a calming neurotransmitter, and ATP production, which is the energy currency of your neurons. So, where can we get these nutrients? From nutrient-dense whole foods. Not supplements alone, though they can be useful, but real, unprocessed food that delivers these compounds in their natural matrix. This brings me to one of the most underappreciated brain-supporting foods, the avocado. Avocados are rich in monounsaturated fats, which support healthy blood flow to the brain, a key factor in cognitive performance. They also contain significant amounts of vitamin E, which is a powerful antioxidant that protects your neurons from oxidative stress. Additionally, they are high in potassium, which supports the electrical activity of neurons, and they provide some folate and other B vitamins. Avocados are a kind of brain multivitamin in whole food form, and the effect is not just on cognition. There's emerging evidence that regular consumption of foods rich in monounsaturated fats can help modulate the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is involved in your body stress response. That means they can help you feel calmer, more balanced, more in control, especially under pressure. Let's also talk about another brain-essential food source, nuts and seeds. Walnuts, in particular, are one of the few plant sources of omega-3s in the form of ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, which your body can partially convert to DHA and EPA. While the conversion rate is low, the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties of walnuts are still incredibly valuable. They also contain polyphenols, which have been shown to support cognitive performance and protect against neurodegenerative processes. What you need to understand is that these foods don't just give you energy in the way caffeine or sugar does. They build the infrastructure of your mind. They enhance the architecture of your thoughts. They strengthen the substrate of your emotions. And they do it in a way that compounds over time. If you start eating to support your brain, regularly incorporating fatty fish, avocados, walnuts, flax seeds, and leafy greens, you may not feel an overnight transformation. But over weeks and months, you will notice a difference. Your clarity will improve. Your ability to focus for long stretches without crashing will increase. Your emotional baseline will stabilize. You'll find yourself more present, more productive, more creative. And I want to be clear, this isn't about perfection. It's about consistency. It's about tilting the balance in your favor. If you're currently eating a diet that's 80% processed and 20% whole foods, just shift that balance to 60/40, then 50/50, then 70/30. You'll begin to notice how your brain responds. You'll develop a kind of cognitive intuition, an awareness of how certain foods affect your thoughts, your energy, your resilience. You might start noticing that a sugary breakfast sends you into a mid-morning crash, while a protein-rich, healthy, fat meal sustains your energy for hours. That's your brain giving you feedback. That's your biology talking, and it's worth listening to. Here's another concept that's important to internalize: the gut-brain axis. The foods you eat don't just affect your brain directly. They also shape the health of your gut microbiome, which plays a massive role in neurotransmitter production, immune function, and inflammation regulation. And inflammation, particularly low-grade chronic inflammation, is one of the major drivers of cognitive decline, mood disorders, and even neurodegenerative disease. When your gut is compromised by inflammatory foods, refined sugars, trans fats, artificial additives, it sends inflammatory cytokines into your bloodstream, which eventually cross the blood-brain barrier and disrupt neural function. On the other hand, when your gut is nourished with fiber-rich vegetables, fermented foods, and polyphenol-rich compounds, it produces short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that support brain health. So, when we talk about feeding the brain, we're also talking about feeding the gut. These systems are intimately connected, and they require precision, not just discipline. They require an understanding of biology, not just willpower. At the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, do you want to operate at half capacity, relying on sheer force of will to get through the day? Or do you want to give your brain every advantage available, nutritionally, chemically, biologically, so that you can thrive, not just survive? And if you want that, if you want to be sharper, calmer, more resilient, more focused, then it starts with what you put on your plate. It starts with feeding the brain the way it was designed to be fed. It starts with understanding that your next breakthrough, your next moment of clarity, your next surge of motivation might not come from another podcast or productivity tool. It might come from the food you eat, from the molecules that shape your mind, from the choice you make 3 times a day that echoes through your neural circuitry like a tuning fork, aligning your biology with your goals, your physiology with your potential, your nutrition with your destiny,